She asked not to be filmed. Only her voice. I don't want to be seen. I just want someone to know. The recorder sat on a wooden table, between a cracked porcelain teacup and a faded black and white photograph. In it, a man in uniform stares at the camera with a half smile. Behind him, a concrete wall marked by shrapnel. My name is Helga. I'm 80 years old, and I typed the last letter Adolf Hitler ever wrote. The pause that follows isn't emotional, it's deliberate. As if she'd rehearsed this line 1,000 times to herself, but never dared to say it out loud. I waited my whole life to say this, and now, I don't know if anyone will believe me. If you've made it this far, it's because you know, deep down, that history still hides things. That's why this channel exists. Here, we uncover what got lost between the lines, what never made it into books, what survived only in the memory of those who saw it firsthand. Subscribe now, not just to support this work, but to gain access to stories more intense, more revealing, and more unsettling than anything you'll find elsewhere. Some are even darker than this one. Others are still waiting to be told. Before we go on, where are you watching from? What country? What city? Comment below. I personally read every message, because each story we tell here echoes somewhere in the world, maybe even on your street. She wasn't chosen. She was pushed. Helga worked as an assistant stenographer at the Ministry of Propaganda in Vienna. It was April 1945, and the city was already trembling under the advance of Soviet troops. Nervous officers were rummaging through files, burning documents, issuing orders that no longer seemed to carry any weight. That's when a major, disheveled uniform, red eyes from exhaustion, pulled her aside and asked, "Can you use a Remington and an Olivetti?" Helga nodded. The next day, she was on an empty train heading to Berlin. The bunker wasn't a place one entered with a badge or an invitation. It felt like being swallowed by a structure that existed outside of time, where clocks no longer mattered. Helga was received by an SS sub-officer who gave her almost no explanation. You'll replace one of the secretaries. The other is ill. No names, no further instructions. She was simply led through suffocating corridors, where flickering lights overhead mixed with the echoes of military commands and the clinking of cutlery from the underground mess hall. She remembers the first time she heard the voice. Not through the radio, but there, alive, coming from behind a steel door. It was softer than she expected. No fervor, no shouting, almost a whisper. "Who's there?" someone asked from inside. The reply was curt, "The new typist." Then the door opened. The room where she worked for 10 days was small, damp, and silent. A wooden desk, a portable typewriter, and a thermos of weak coffee. The chair creaked every time she moved. And still, the silence felt total, as if the world had been forgotten just a few meters above the earth. She saw Traudl Junge only once, pale, exhausted, holding a stack of coffee-stained notes. "Good luck," she said, then vanished. Helga didn't belong to that world, but without realizing it, she was already inside it. Time didn't pass there. It dragged like the war itself, stuck in that bunker. Helga didn't ask questions. She listened, and she listened carefully. The corridors transmitted everything. The tension in whispered orders, the hesitant footsteps of officers who no longer believed in victory, the long silences that preceded definitive news. It was like living inside an organism on the verge of collapse, where each breath could be the last before everything gave way. There was something profoundly unnatural about that space. Smiles were forced, politeness mechanical. Eva Braun walked past her like a perfectly dressed shadow, always with a cigarette between her fingers and a distant gaze. As if her body were there, but her mind had already escaped to a world that would never know peace. Helga recalled one particular night. She heard muffled laughter coming from the dining hall. She peeked in and saw 3 officers playing cards on top of a map of France, using bullets as poker chips. One of them looked up and said, without stopping the game, You know what's worse than losing a war? Pretending we're still fighting it. The days became fragments. Helga typed names, locations, dates. Some messages were simple, others made no sense. One said only, "Reinforce the gates, seal level 2. No one goes in." She didn't know who or what it referred to, and she didn't dare ask. But she understood that there was an inner core even deeper, a layer of decisions even the generals couldn't access, a bunker within the bunker, and at its center, Hitler. She saw him for the first time on the 8th day. He was walking slowly, his head slightly bowed, as if the weight of his own existence had bent his spine. There was no grandeur, only frailty. The man who had set the world on fire was now a pale figure, hollow-eyed, drowning in clothes too large, and hands that never stopped trembling. When he passed her, Helga turned her eyes away. But he spoke, and his voice, though weak, still sliced through the air like a dull blade. "Keep doing your work," he said, and walked on. She never forgot the sound of that sentence, nor the sour smell that lingered in the corridor at that moment. A mix of disinfectant, sweat, and damp concrete. Everything around her seemed to be decaying slowly, yet with no hurry to die. That's when she understood she wasn't just a typist, she was now the extension of what remained of his will. April 28th. The air in the bunker had grown heavier, almost unbreathable. Every breath carried a metallic taste. Rumors moved faster than the people. Mussolini had been captured and executed. The Soviets were just a few blocks from the chancellery. And yet, inside that cement shell, routines persisted. Meals. Reports. Directives that no longer left the compound. Orders for fronts that no longer existed. Helga was called late that night. A guard appeared at her door, said only, "He needs a typist," and led her down a narrower corridor than usual. One she hadn't yet walked. The lights were dim, the silence suffocating. When they stopped in front of a door, she felt a pressure in her chest that she couldn't explain. Not fear. Something colder. Final. Inside, Hitler sat alone, not at his usual desk, but beside a cot, surrounded by scattered papers and maps. The expression was hollow. Not defeat, not rage, just absence. His hands rested over a single page of handwritten notes. He motioned for her to sit. "You'll type this exactly as I say. No corrections." She typed without looking up. Each word fell into place like a nail sealing a coffin. There were no rhetorical flourishes, no call to arms. It was not a testament, nor a justification. It was a farewell, dry, surgical. One sentence, however, made her hands falter. "The new world will be built upon ruins, and from those ruins the order will return." She hesitated. He noticed. "Write it," he said, and she obeyed. When it was done, he signed with a faint, broken line, then asked her to make 2 copies. One was sealed in an envelope. The other, he gave to her. "Keep this safe. It may be needed one day." That sentence would never leave her. What could he have meant? That someone, someday, would use that letter as a key, as evidence, or as a warning. Helga left the room without looking back, but something inside her had shifted. The girl who entered that night was not the same who returned to her quarters. She had become the last witness of a sentence that history never read aloud. The war ended. The Allies declared victory. Photographs of liberation circled the world, statues fell, and flags were replaced. But Helga didn't celebrate. She didn't return to Vienna. She changed her name and moved to Innsbruck, where no one knew who she had been or where she had worked. She burned the uniform, buried the identification tags, and hid the carbon copy of the letter between the walls of a rented attic. For a time, she convinced herself that it was over. But silence is not peace. Silence is a burden, one that grows heavier with every year it's kept. She tried to forget, to rebuild. She worked as a secretary in a clinic, married a man who died young, never had children. Her nights were filled with the sound of typing machines echoing through her dreams. Sometimes she heard the voice again, whispering that same sentence. Keep this safe. She watched as books were published, films produced, trials broadcast. The world wanted to understand what had happened, and why. But no one ever mentioned the final letter. Not in reports, not in the Nuremberg transcripts, not even in the most detailed biographies. That page had simply vanished from history, and that was the worst part. Not the fear of being found, but the certainty that something so important, so definitive, had been deliberately erased. Helga thought many times about turning it in, sending it anonymously to a newspaper, leaving it at a university library. But every scenario brought the same hesitation. What if they don't believe it? What if they destroy it? Or worse, what if they understand it and use it? So she waited. Decades passed. The Cold War began, then ended. Germany reunited. But she remained in the same apartment, with the same fear folded neatly between layers of plaster and dust. A relic of a moment that no one wanted to admit had existed. Her silence wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Because sometimes speaking too soon is the same as not being heard at all. It took Helga years to notice. The line she had hesitated to type, the one about ruins and order, wasn't just poetic. It mirrored a phrase she had seen once before, in a footnote scribbled hastily on a military communique weeks earlier. She remembered because it didn't fit the rest of the document. At the time, she thought it was a personal remark from an officer, maybe a philosophical afterthought. But now, with the letter echoing the same wording, she started to wonder, was it a code? She began rereading fragments from memory. Military orders, internal notes, discarded files she once thought meaningless. Certain terms repeated themselves. Stahlkeller, Stufe 3, Wiederordnung. All vague, ambiguous, but unnerving in their consistency. It was as if the Nazi high command had begun drafting not just defensive strategies for the war, but theoretical frameworks for what would come after their defeat. The letter, she now suspected, wasn't addressed to the German people, nor to posterity. It was meant for someone specific, a successor, a sleeper cell, a guardian of the flame, waiting in silence for decades. The ambiguity wasn't a flaw, it was the mechanism. Plausible deniability, deniable commands. What haunted her most was a single detail she had nearly forgotten. Before sealing the envelope, Hitler had drawn a line across the bottom. Not a signature, not a flourish, just a single, horizontal stroke. Beneath it, 3 letters in pencil. KNZ. She searched every book, every archive she could access anonymously. Nothing. The acronym meant nothing officially, but then she found an old directory from the Reichspostministerium. Kanzlei National Zukunft. A paper-only department, supposedly dissolved in 1943, but its name lingered like a shadow, the National Office for the Future. And suddenly, the letter she had typed didn't feel like a farewell anymore. It felt like an activation. It was the autumn of 1963 when the first knock came. A polite rhythm, too composed to be accidental. Helga opened the door to find a man in an overcoat, holding a briefcase and wearing an expression that betrayed nothing. "Miss Berghoff?" he asked, using the alias she had lived under for nearly 2 decades. She nodded. He smiled faintly. "I believe you knew someone important." She froze. No one outside Innsbruck should have known that name, let alone linked her to anything or anyone from Berlin. He didn't elaborate, didn't request entry. Simply handed her a folded piece of paper and left without waiting for a response. It contained no threat, no request. Only a sentence typed. The line was drawn and some saw it. For weeks, she said nothing, did nothing. But the visit cracked something inside her. She reread the letter again and again, trying to see what he had seen. The phrasing, the cadence, the reference to ruins, to rebirth. She began to sense not only a message, but an alignment. As if somewhere, others were also holding fragments of the same code, waiting for a signal, watching for others who remembered. Years passed. The world changed. Color televisions, man on the moon, the rise of new nations. But Helga remained still, surrounded by her silence, until the second knock came. This time it was 1978. A younger man, American accent, same rhythm on the door, same tailored coat. He didn't ask a question. He made a statement. "It hasn't been activated. That's why you're still alive." Then handed her a sealed envelope with no return address and walked away. Inside, there was only one item, a carbon copy of the letter she had typed, her letter. The same creases, the same smudges, but not the one she'd kept hidden. Someone had another copy. That moment shattered any illusion she had that she was alone with the truth. Somewhere out there, others were keeping the story breathing, silently, strategically, and she began to understand. The final days of the war weren't a collapse. They were a handoff. In 1986, Helga received a letter through regular post. No return address, no postmark. Just a pristine envelope with her assumed name, handwritten in blue ink. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white, clearly taken decades earlier. It showed a door embedded in stone, half covered by ivy, with a faint cross carved above the frame. On the back, 3 words in German. "Sie haben es." They have it. She recognized the monastery. It was in Südtirol, near the Austrian-Italian border, where she had once taken refuge during the early post-war chaos. At the time, the monks had asked no questions. Now, nearly 40 years later, it seemed one of them had never stopped watching. That same month, she made the journey. Alone. No one noticed the elderly woman entering the grounds with a small bag and cautious steps. The monastery looked unchanged, but the faces were all new. Young men with shaved heads and gentle smiles who didn't know who she was or why she had come. She claimed to be a former guest, reminiscing. They offered her tea, but she wasn't there for tea. She wandered until she found the corridor, the eastern wing beneath the library. The ivy had grown thicker and the stone had darkened, but the door was there, still sealed. No key, only a number pad, likely added in the years since. She didn't try to guess. She didn't need to enter. Because she finally understood what the letter was. It was not a message. It was a token, a passphrase, a verification. In the years since 1945, a new kind of network had formed, not through radios or couriers, but through symbols, language, and memory. The letter she had typed was not meant to be delivered. It was meant to be recognized. That door, that monastery, was just one node, a checkpoint, proof that the ideology hadn't died. It had gone dormant. And Helga, unknowingly, had been the one to carry the seed across decades, safely, silently, faithfully. She waited until her 80th birthday. Not out of sentiment, but because the number itself held meaning in her mind. A full cycle, the end of a silent decade for each year of her life. That morning, Helga placed the original letter, still folded in its original creases, onto the kitchen table. Next to it, an old tape recorder. And then she pressed record. Her voice was calm. Not fragile, not nostalgic, just deliberate. "I don't want to be remembered. I only want this to be heard." She recounted everything, from the day the major pulled her aside in Vienna to the sealed door beneath the monastery. She named no names beyond her own. She gave no dates beyond those already known. But the emotion in her tone made every pause feel heavy, as if she were not confessing guilt, but surrendering weight. She revealed something she had never told anyone. On the morning of May the 1st, 1945, before fleeing the bunker in the chaos, she had taken a second copy of the letter, not the one Hitler had handed her, but one she made for herself in secret, hidden in the lining of her coat. The copy she had buried behind plaster was not the only one, and she had sent that second copy, years later, to a man in Switzerland. A historian, a friend of a friend, someone she thought could protect it. But he never responded. No confirmation, no denial, just silence. She never knew whether it had reached him, or what he had done with it. This confession, she said, was not about seeking redemption. It was about confronting a truth that too many had avoided, that not all endings are true endings, that some legacies are not buried, they are banked like embers, waiting for the right breath to ignite them again. Then she ended the recording, wrapped the letter in cloth, and placed both in a small, locked case. "I don't know if this will be heard," she whispered before turning off the tape. "But if it is, it means someone else remembers too." Helga passed away 6 months later, quietly, in her sleep. No obituary, no surviving relatives. Her landlord found the locked case atop the kitchen table, beside a single photograph of her younger self. Eyes sharp, hands resting over a typewriter, unaware of the weight they would carry. The case was never opened publicly. Its contents were never claimed. But the recording somehow found its way online, stripped of names, stripped of faces, but intact in meaning. A confession without a trial, a story without a headline. Just a voice, aged but steady, recounting the final words of a regime the world had sworn to forget. Some called it a hoax, others a warning. But for those who listened closely, truly listened, there was something unmistakable beneath the surface. A pattern, a map. The faint outline of a future that had been planned long before the war ended. A plan not for survival, but for return. Helga's story is not about loyalty, nor ideology. It's about the burden of carrying something unspeakable, and the loneliness of knowing no one will ever fully understand it. And perhaps that's why she recorded it. Not to change the world, but to make sure it never again believed that evil vanishes with the sound of gunfire or the signing of treaties. Because in the silence that follows a war, some words remain, waiting. If this story moved you, if it made you question what remains hidden behind official endings, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one, and each one brings us closer to the truths history didn't want us to find. Tell me in the comments below, from what city and country are you watching this? I read every single one,